Hey Warriors. This video is for U.S. government, and it's another Supreme Court case. So you're going to want to pull out one of these and take some notes on the Supreme Court case, Texas versus Johnson. Texas versus Johnson was based on a criminal case. The crime was committed in 1984 in Dallas, Texas. It wasn't until 1989 that the Supreme Court agreed to review the case, re-argue it, and then issue their decision on it. So the criminal case was 1984, the Supreme Court case was 1989. And the historical background or context for this case has to do specifically with the year 1984. 1984 was a general election year in the United States, meaning it was one of those election years where the president is elected. In 1980, President Ronald Reagan was elected for the first time, and he was a member of the Republican Party. In 1984, the Republican Party asked him to run for president again, so he would be representing in 1984, in that election, the Republican Party a second time. And in Dallas, Texas, in 1984, they had the Republican National Convention, and this is like a big party for all the Republicans, and they go and they officially name Ronald Reagan as their candidate for the 1984 election. Now, Ronald Reagan had already been president for 4 years, and he was either very, very popular or very, very unpopular, depending on who you talk to. Some of the things that he was both popular and unpopular for were some economic theories called trickle-down economics, sometimes called Reaganomics. And this theory is economic theory that's been used by other people as well. And it basically says that if you structure the tax code in such a way that you allow the very richest people and the very richest corporations in the country to continue to get very, very wealthy, then their wealth will kind of spill over on everyone else in society, kind of like a champagne fountain, if you've ever seen one of those at a wedding, okay? And again, there are some people that love this economic idea. There are other people that really, really hate it. So that was part of his administration. The other thing that was part of his administration was that he was very closely associated with kind of the new involvement in a very broad way of the evangelical kind of right-wing voters in America. There was an organization founded in 1979 called the Moral Majority, and this was an organization, among others, but this was one of the main organizations that really kind of mobilized and got sort of right-wing conservative Christians to vote in the elections. And this organization, Moral Majority, was all about Ronald Reagan. They were pushing him in 1980. They were pushing him again in 1984. And so again, there were some people that felt great about that, some people that didn't feel so great about it. Another thing about the Reagan administration was that the military budget was rising very, very quickly under his administration. There was a lot of money being allocated to building weapons, nuclear weapons, for instance, and that made some people very, very happy because we were in kind of a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union, but it made a lot of other people very unhappy and very frightened. There was some scandal during his presidency, the Iran-Contra affair. You can look that up if you want details on it. But all that to say, Ronald Reagan was kind of a polarizing figure. You were either very much for him or you were probably very much against him. And so that's the context within which this crime is committed and this Supreme Court case emerges. So let's look at the constitutional issues at stake. This is, again, a First Amendment free speech case. So the constitutional issue at stake is the First Amendment. Now let's look at some of the players. The first person I want to look at is a man named Gregory Lee Johnson. And Gregory Lee Johnson described himself as an American revolutionary. In 1976, he had joined the Revolutionary Communist Youth Brigade, and he was a political activist. He was in Dallas, Texas, at the same time the Republican National Convention was being held. He wasn't in the convention center. he was out on the street, across the street from the convention center, and he was protesting. He was one of those people who didn't like Ronald Reagan, didn't like his administration, didn't like his policies, didn't like anything about him. So he was outside while the convention was going on inside, and he was protesting against Ronald Reagan, against the Republican Party, against the federal government, you name it. He was upset. And he had a lot of friends there with him protesting also. So he's one player. He becomes the center of this controversy. Another player is the state of Texas. And the state of Texas, obviously, was where the Republican National Convention was being held in Dallas, Texas. And Texas had a law about the American flag. And it was an anti-flag desecration law. And what desecration means is to disrespect or maybe violently disrespect something that is considered to be sacred. The sacred thing in this case is the American flag itself. And the American flag, in fact, is kind of our third player or our third character in this story. The flag has long been a symbol of our nation's identity and our national unity, right? Most of you, if you look at the American flag, not only do you immediately recognize it as a symbol of America, but it may have strong feelings or strong emotions attached to it because it is such a strong symbol of the country. And so it's out of that very strong and sometimes emotional and patriotic symbolism that these anti-flag desecration laws were written and passed. And Texas wasn't the only state that had one of these laws. Most of the states in the country had anti-flag desecration laws. So now what happens in the story? Gregory Lee Johnson is outside the convention center. He's protesting. One of the people protesting with him pulls a flag down and hands it to Gregory Lee Johnson. Gregory Lee Johnson takes the flag in his hand. With the other hand, he douses the flag. He soaks it in kerosene, and then he sets it on fire. And he holds the flag up while it's burning and then drops it to the ground and allows it to continue to burn until it's consumed by those flames. Now, this obviously upset a lot of people around him because, again, the way people feel about the flag is often very emotional. It's very tied to their feelings about the country, tied to feelings of patriotism. And so Gregory Lee Johnson is arrested for violating that anti-flag desecration law. He's fined $2,000 and he's sentenced to 1 year in jail. He thinks that he should be allowed to burn the flag, so he appeals to a higher court. He appeals to the Texas Criminal Appeals Court, or Criminal Court of Appeals, and the Criminal Court of Appeals in Texas actually overturns the lower court's decision. And they say, yeah, Gregory, you're right, you should get to burn the flag. We're going to overturn the lower court's decision. So then the state of Texas is actually mad at its own Criminal Court of Appeals, and so the state of Texas sues Gregory Lee Johnson and asks the Supreme Court to look at the case. That's why Johnson's name is second in this lawsuit. It was because Texas sued Johnson, not the other way around. In the previous two cases we've looked at, Charles Schenck sued the United States. He was listed first, they were listed second. In the next case we looked at, Clarence Brandenburg sued the state of Ohio. That's why he was listed first and Ohio was listed second. In this case, the state of Texas sued Gregory Lee Johnson. That's why it's Texas versus Johnson and not Johnson versus Texas. So now we have this case in the hands of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has to decide, is burning the American flag something that should be protected by an individual's right to free speech as guaranteed in the First Amendment? Well, the Supreme Court takes a look at the case and they examine all the evidence, they discuss it, and they vote, and the vote comes back 5-4, very close vote. The 5 justices agreed that Gregory Johnson should be able to burn the flag, that activity should be protected by his First Amendment free speech rights. The 4 other justices were the dissenting justices. They disagreed with the majority's opinion. And so let's take a look at what was written in terms of the way the court was thinking about these majority voters and dissenting voters. First of all, Justice William Brennan Jr. wrote the majority opinion. And he wrote this: "The government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable." Now, in this sentence, Justice Brennan doesn't even use the word speech. He instead describes what Gregory Lee Johnson did as the expression of an idea. So he's talking as much about freedom of expression or freedom of conduct as he is about freedom of speech. Now let's look at the dissenting opinion, and this was written by the Chief Justice of the court, Chief Justice William Rehnquist. He says a couple of things. Number one, he says that the American flag has occupied a unique position as the symbol of our nation. And he's reinforcing that idea that the American flag is sacred. It's something that should be protected. Later on in his dissenting opinion, he writes, "Flag burning is more likely to be indulged in not to express a particular idea, but to antagonize other people or to just bother or frustrate or offend other people." So that was the dissenting opinion. But again, that was the losing opinion. The majority opinion stated that freedom of expression to burn the American flag was something that Gregory Lee Johnson should be able to do because it was protected by his First Amendment rights found in the Constitution of the United States. Now, what was the ongoing impact of this case on American society? Well, first of all, those anti-flag desecration laws had to go away. And most states had them because the Supreme Court just said, you can do that. It's the expression of an idea. In this case, because Johnson was in a very politically charged environment, it was pretty clear that he was expressing displeasure toward the federal government, the Reagan administration, the Republican Party. So those flag anti-desecration laws had to go away. The second thing, and maybe most importantly, that grows out of this Supreme Court case decision is that freedom of speech is expanded again to include freedom of expression. And maybe you've heard this kind of phrase before, freedom of expression. It's not just what you say or maybe even writing down what you say, but it could be some behavior that is done without speaking a single word, where an idea is expressed. You, the Supreme Court says, have freedom to express that idea because of your First Amendment protections of your free speech rights. Just a little follow-up on Gregory Lee Johnson. After he won this case, he became pretty well known for burning the American flag, and he continued to demonstrate and protest, and he would often do that by burning the American flag. Well, just a little fact, a little bit of a trivia question. In 2016, he was taking part in a demonstration, and he lit an American flag on fire, and he actually set himself and two other protesters on fire in the process. A single word where an idea is expressed. You, the Supreme Court says, have freedom to express that idea because of your First Amendment protections of your free speech rights. Just a little follow-up on Gregory Lee Johnson. After he won this case, he became pretty well known for burning the American flag, and he continued to demonstrate and protest, and he would often do that by burning the American flag. Well, just a little fact, a little bit of a trivia question. In 2016, he was taking part in a demonstration, and he lit an American flag on fire, and he actually set himself and two other protesters on fire in the process. Now, they didn't die. They weren't seriously injured. They suffered minor burns. But again, that might be a trivia question you run into at some point in your life. And that's a little follow-up on Gregory Lee Johnson. That's it for this case. I will see you in the next video.